Welcome back to Aged Like Milk, the series where I talk about topics I hope to be wrong about just to jinx them into reality. The idea of a HD remaster of Planet Robobot for the Switch 1 seemed to fly under the radar of modern discourse. In December of 2024, popular insider and winner of the Leaker of the Year 2025 award, Nate the Hate, claimed Kirby Planet Robobot would be coming to Switch 1 in 2025. At the time, people shrugged it off as a mere rumor, but after miraculously predicting the Switch 2's announcement date, which appeared incredibly unlikely considering Donkey Kong Country Returns HD released on the same day, he gained massive credibility. Normally I don't waste more than a 1mm pupil dilation on any rumor and go on with my day, but I and many other people had every reason to at least slightly entertain the possibility. The idea of a Planet Robobot HD for the Switch felt so logical, it could have passed as a lucky guess. Kirby has a long history of getting spin-offs, ports or even full mainline entries, very late into console's life cycle. So when Nintendo announced one last Switch 1 Direct just before the big Switch 2 presentation, it felt like the stars had aligned. But it didn't happen. That was weird. Has Nintendo forgotten about Kirby? What we got instead was the only somewhat justifiable Switch 2 version of the Forgotten Land and Air Riders. A solid substitute if you ask me. By this point it was pretty safe to say Planet Robobot HD wouldn't happen in 2025 anymore. Hate the Nate himself stated it still exists, but it's Nintendo's hand to act. Internal planning can be more flexible than you think, especially for something like a relatively low stakes filler launch. After all, Nintendo sat on Metroid Prime Remastered for years, so Planet Robobot might already be finished with the team simply waiting for the right moment to release it. But with a new year come new chances and potentially 5 more Kirby releases to piss off Pikmin fans. Kirby in 2026 is in a strange position to contemplate the idea of more releases. In 2027 the franchise celebrates its 35th anniversary, and while that number isn't quite as flashy as 25 or 30, records prove hell loves to salute their mascot thoroughly. It also doesn't matter if it's a Switch 1 game releasing 2 years after the following console entered the market, since Extra Epic Yarn also launched in 2019 on the 3DS, when the Switch 1 established itself since 2017. There's still a chance for the next 3D Kirby to release in 2026, but with Mario's anniversary, the possibility of a new 3D Mario, and the fact that a 3D Kirby would likely have been announced already if it were launching in spring, I think they'll take the extra year. With the Forgotten Land, Kirby entered a new dimension and therefore a new dimension of ambition. These kinds of entries require more development time, and with the IP's rising popularity, growing scope and increasing expectations, the creators will gladly take another year to fine-tune their upcoming next-gen showcase. 5 years for a Kirby game might sound insane, but sometimes strategic circumstances shift release dates. Even if the next 3D entry releases 5 years after the Forgotten Land, that doesn't mean it actually took 5 years to develop. Kirby isn't dropped in the middle of Mario's spotlight or alongside other high-profile releases, and the Zelda movie in 2027 covers a different enough audience. This puts a potential Planet Robobot HD in a peculiar spot, because theoretically 2026 would be the perfect fit. Much like Returns HD, it could serve as strong supplementary content, serving the Switch 1 audience with another older but highly praised 2D platformer. At the same time, we don't know the scope of the reimagining, whether it's more in line with Return to Dreamland Deluxe or more of a straightforward port like Extra Epic Yarn. If it's the former, it would make sense for HAL to hold it until 2027 as part of the celebration. They've already proven their willingness and capability to release 3 Kirby games in a single year, without worrying about franchise fatigue. Launching what's potentially the best 2D Kirby platformer alongside another ambitious 3D entry would once again cast a shadow over every other Nintendo anniversary, just like they did for the 30th. But why Planet Robobot if Triple Deluxe would be the next in the chronological release order of the series? Apparently Planet Robobot sold around 1.6 million copies, with a user score of 8.5. In comparison, Triple Deluxe sold about 1 million more and enjoys similar critical acclaim. Of course, there are several contributing factors, mainly Triple Deluxe releasing during the peak of the 3DS popularity and benefiting from the renewed attention the franchise received after Return to Dreamland on the Wii. From a corporate strategist's perspective, it makes perfect sense to view Triple Deluxe as the more obvious candidate for a remaster. This isn't a case where decision makers can simply glance at Metacritic and instantly tell which game is more beloved. It requires a deeper understanding of context and long-term reception. Keeping that in mind, I've always had the impression that HAL is unusually in tune with their player base and seem to genuinely know their audience. Watch any Kirby game ranking video and you will see Planet Robobot almost always outperforming Triple Deluxe, sometimes even topping the entire series. At a time where everyone hates people like Elon Musk, Planet Robobot with its main antagonist is also a good selling point. It's widely considered one of the best entries in the franchise, and HAL is surely aware of that to some extent. The financial success of an HD remaster is always limited by a key factor: players who don't want to pay full price for a game they've already played, or one that doesn't offer enough changes to justify their investment. Especially under Nintendo's recent questionable pricing strategy. When you remaster a game, you should choose a title the core audience truly cares about, as those are the fans who support the franchise more deeply than the average customer. I love Triple Deluxe as much as the next person, but Planet Robobot is more beloved overall and would benefit just as much, if not more, from a graphical overhaul, thanks to its distinct industrial theming. Triple Deluxe certainly has its own aesthetic identity, but visually it might come across as too similar to Return to Dreamland Deluxe for normies. Nintendo's already shown a willingness to skip titles that would have been next in the line, in favor of remaking games they see as a higher priority. Even Pokémon has started to break away from its formulaic remake pattern, skipping Black and White entirely to revisit X and Y with Legend ZA instead. The ideal scenario would be a double pack like Mario Galaxy 1+2, but if HAL decides to remaster just one, it should be Planet Robobot HD. The lack of an official announcement also gives me the chance to speculate about ideas that an initial reveal trailer could preempt, such as the art style. Return to Dreamland Deluxe surprised everyone with its substantial expansion despite releasing only 1 year after The Forgotten Land, so I have no reason to assume Planet Robobot HD would be a bare bones port, especially since they have had more than enough time for a proper reinvention by now. The updated visuals are naturally the first feature to notice in remakes, and I hope they don't reuse Return to Dreamland Deluxe's graphics. While I consider it the most fitting one for the series in general, it doesn't necessarily match Planet Robobot's industrial theme and general tone. One of the original game's main selling points is how it maintains a primary robotic setting throughout the entire adventure. Reflecting this invasive mechanization with Return to Dreamland Deluxe's cheerful visual style wouldn't properly convey that theme. If the original Planet Robobot looks like London seen through the eyes of a child or Kirby, the remake should show how it actually looks in reality. It doesn't have to be completely new orientation or overly dark. For example, they could use Star Allies graphics and make them slightly grittier. The only reason Planet Robobot shares the exact same graphics as Triple Deluxe is its rushed development cycle of roughly 2 years. Otherwise it wouldn't have been possible to meet the deadline. The end result is gorgeous for 3DS hardware, and it's a wonder the game turned out as well as it did, but there simply wasn't enough time to invest resources into a distinct artistic direction. Some concept arts showed what I can only describe as a contaminated take on Kirby's usual playful art style. Everything looks Kirby but muted, with overlays, dusty gradients, smoky skies or stained metals. Nothing is pristine, and even the pinks and greens are slightly sickly or oxidized. If Return to Dreamland Deluxe managed to amplify the original game's whimsical tone by a good margin, Planet Robobot HD could easily do the same. This is purely speculation on my part, but I suspect the developers try to explore different art styles whenever they have the opportunity. Triple Deluxe borrowed Return to Dreamland's graphics because it had the novelty of being the first 2D title with 3D visuals on a handheld, and Star Allies gets a similar pass for modernizing the established style in HD. Return to Dreamland Deluxe could have easily copied Star Allies graphics, since Star Allies was already based on Return to Dreamland for the Wii, but they didn't. Instead, we received a fully original departure inspired by one of the cancelled GameCube projects, further establishing yet another new graphical vision for the franchise. To say that Kirby stagnates visually and mostly relies on reused assets is simply incorrect. Planet Robobot HD has the opportunity to stand out even more among modern two-dimensional Kirby adventures, which have already been criticized for looking and feeling too similar back in the day. It also would help to compensate for the missing 3D effect. Planet Robobot is an ideal example of excellent stereoscopic 3D, and although you can effortlessly beat the game without it, the experience isn't nearly the same. The level design was constructed with the effect in mind, and all those layers, perspective shifts, and purposefully crafted camera tricks emphasize the 3DS main gimmick. As one of the -3 people who actually enjoy and still uses the 3D effect in 3DS games, I understand that its absence in the Planet Robobot remake is inevitable. Star Allies gave us a taste of how those 3D sections would work on regular hardware hardware in Taransa's and Susie's campaign, so it's not detrimental to the core experience. Skyward Sword HD found a way to transform its deeply rooted motion controls into a proper button control method, and Planet Robobot's 3D effect isn't nearly as essential as in Zelda's case. However, a strong art direction could help remedy this loss. Return to Dreamland Deluxe comic-style visuals already made objects and characters pop thanks to striking outlines. By properly highlighting colors, shadows and lighting, they could effectively counterbalance the lack of stereoscopic 3D. At the end of the day, I wouldn't seriously complain if they reused the same artistic direction, but given how long it has been since Return to Dreamland Deluxe, a complete revision of the graphics doesn't seem particularly unrealistic. Similarly expectable is the addition of a multiplayer. The main campaign of the original Planet Robobot was a pure single-player experience due to the 3DS and interchangeable font background, but I don't think they hinder the gameplay from incorporating extra players. Some parts need some rework, and if 4 players are too much to handle, everyone could easily be content with at least a second one. Modern Kirby titles love to include their multiplayer whenever they can, and sensitive context-specific level design was never a serious reason to make the idea impossible. Rainbow Curse's controls are so specifically tied to the Wii U gamepad, and they still managed it to add 3 more players whether or not the integration actually makes sense or perfectly works. This is also the reason why I think the absence of a 2-player mode in both Triple Deluxe and Planet Robobot was bound to hardware, because if there's a chance they take it. You may argue the robot armor suit is another argument against the multiplayer, but the Forgotten Lands character-specific gimmick, Mouthful Mode, also found a way to work without sacrificing Bandana D. Yes, the second player would probably be restricted in certain moments, but it's a drawback worth taking, and a lot more rewarding for young children who want to play with their siblings despite any seeming player 2 disadvantage. For possible playable characters, there aren't actually many choices. Meta Knight and King DDD make no sense in regards of the story, and the only potential characters left are Bandana D or more Kirbys. If the game accomplishes it to build in a 4-player co-op, however, I would greatly appreciate the return of the Meta Knights, the swordsman henchmen we have often seen back in the day. They already are 3D models in-game, so the problem isn't the creation, but what abilities they would be based on. 2 of them could reference spear and staff, but the rest wields weapons we cannot correspond skills to. This is where my next hope comes into play: 2 more copy abilities. Return to Dreamland introduces Mecha and Sand, which imply they don't need to have any connection to the corresponding game's theme. Using the 2 remaining Meta Knights, Axe Knight and Mace Knight, as a foundation, Kirby could gain the Axe and Mace ability. I think everyone was a little disappointed back in the day when those enemies didn't give any abilities whatsoever, so not only could we receive 2 incredibly stylish new additions for Kirby himself, but bring back Meta Knight's sadly forgotten henchmen into the spotlight. They would fit lore-wise, as they help to repair the damaged halberd from the opening, or join Kirby to help free Meta Knight from Haltman. It's certainly a much more interesting take than the regular candidates, and would help to individualize Planet Robobot's multiplayer in contrast to Return to Dreamland Deluxe. At this point, I don't actually believe Nate the Nate ever had concrete information about Planet Robobot HD. It feels more like a speculative claim designed to generate temporary headlines. Judging by the kind of information he typically shares and how his sources operate, his insider connections seem more closely tied to third-party announcements, rather than internal first-party Nintendo projects. When a development team is invited by Nintendo to participate in an upcoming Direct, they usually aren't even told whether it's an indie world, a partner showcase, or a general Nintendo Direct. This is why he often shares information with the caveat that he doesn't know whether it's for a partner showcase or a general Direct, because his contact apparently isn't sure either. Combine that uncertainty with the fact that Kirby is one of the most leak-proof franchises in Nintendo's entire repertoire, and it becomes highly unlikely he would know something like this so far in advance. The leaker you should trust when it comes to Kirby is Nintendo themselves. After all, 2 of the most recent Kirby leaks came directly from them. My satisfaction with Kirby doesn't hinge on the release of Planet Robobot HD. The franchise has been meeting my expectations flawlessly, and after Air Riders I feel like I can never demand for anything again. Even so, the idea of willing Planet Robobot HD into existence has its own engaging appeal, and I'm sticking with it until it happens. You can't convince me that vocal fans weren't the reason the 1000 Year Door remake became reality. So if we wish hard enough, maybe our plea will reach Nova. Share your Monkey's Paw version of Planet Robobot HD in the comments, and the best one will receive a precious heart from yours truly.